Hello everybody, my name is Karen King and welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, I tell interesting or scary stories that I found online. If you have stories of your own that you'd like to share with us, there is a link down below in the description to a Reddit page where I will go through everything and will credit you, and hopefully everyone just has a good time. Also, thank you to everyone who was patient with me during my move and while I was sick. I am fully recovered now, I am moved in, I am happy, but for now, enjoy the video. This has been ongoing for some time now, but tonight it was particularly weird. So, for some context, I'm a 25-year-old female, and I live on the second story of my building across from a big city. We have lots of houseless people in the area, and there's a safe injection site right next to my home. I'll mention right off the bat that I have been houseless within my lifetime, from age 8 to 10, and grew up in the care of an addict. I completely empathize with folks who are having a tough go at things. However, I also value my safety, and my neighbor's safety for that matter. So I will preemptively apologize if at any point I sound frustrated at this ongoing situation. I'm mad at the situation that has plagued both the life of myself and the houseless man who is tormenting my building. This all started about a year ago when my partner and I were nearly attacked by this houseless man while downstairs in our parking lot. To summarize the situation, we had just gotten home when my partner was going to drop me off. We didn't live together at the time. We kind of do now, but only on the weekends. And as we said our goodnights, we noticed a man pacing in the visitor's parking lot who was seemingly having a rough time. We kept our distance, car doors locked and windows up, and eventually the man got the hint and left. Just to set the scene a bit here, my parking lot has two sections. One is a public/guest parking area. The second is a locked gate with a smaller locked door for residents to safely park overnight. The gate requires a fob entry, and the door has a regular building key. Both were made with metal bars. This is important for later. I got out of the car and proceeded to walk toward the door, key in hand. My partner started up the car, which caused the houseless man to rush back into the parkade and promptly attack the car. He hopped onto the hood, beating on the windows and trying to rip off the mirrors. I watched in horror as this terrifying situation evolved next to me, a mere 14 feet away. I quickly got my key into the lock and opened the door at lightning speed. The sound of my keys caught the attention of the man, and he promptly sprinted towards me. Thankfully, by this point, I had begun closing the door behind me. By the time he got to me, I slammed the door in his face and stepped backwards while he screamed at me. While my partner realized I was safely behind a locked door, he got into gear and drove away. Moments later, he called me and instructed me to get away from the door and safely upstairs. It was a good thing he did. I felt like I was in freeze mode. I couldn't move. My heart was pounding out of my chest as the houseless man was screaming disgusting things at me, most of which revolved around saying me and gesturing crudely at his groin and flicking his tongue. I finally broke my fear freeze and walked away as he chanted, "Pretty lady, pretty lady." I rushed upstairs and quickly closed the blinds of my windows. I heard him still yelling and chanting outside for a good few minutes later, but then I heard something unusual. A lighter clicking. The silence was deafening as the lighter clicked repeatedly. Eventually the click stopped and he began laughing. I looked outside, peering through the blinds, and realized he was attempting to set our building's wooden fence on fire. Luckily, it had been raining, so the fence wasn't catching. I quickly hopped on a call with emergency services, who sent a police car and a fire truck. As soon as the cop car pulled up, the houseless man went ballistic and started screaming bloody murder. They apprehended him quickly and took him away in an ambulance. Months passed with no sign of him. But one day, a resident in my building reported being attacked by a man who matched his description. After that incident, we, the residents, repeatedly heard him screaming, crying, moaning, and laughing at least 3 times a week outside our building, generally at night. He also started trashing and damaging people's cars when they parked in the guest parking lot. Thankfully, we installed a new gate last week that closes off the guest parking behind another fob-activated gate. The thing is, as soon as the gate got installed, the man left us alone. It has been a quiet week. It's been nice, but tonight, about an hour ago, I was laying in bed scrolling on TikTok when I heard what sounded like soft sobbing. At first, I thought it was coming from TikTok, but after some scrolling I realized it was coming from outside. I looked outside and there he was, sobbing and pacing around in the back alley. He suddenly switched gears though and started jogging while groaning loudly and continuing to cry while occasionally hitting/attacking the new fence we installed. He was seemingly left now, but I'm terrified at this new habit. I'm really hoping he doesn't start crying outside my building routinely. I feel really bad for the guy, and I also feel bad for making this post, but the whole situation is really freaking me out. I don't feel safe in my own home, and I just need to vent. Two years ago, my mother and I were home alone for a few days because my father and my brother were traveling together. On a Friday, I got home from work around 1 p.m. My mother came home at 5 p.m., opened my bedroom door and said, "Hello." We had dinner together and then we each went to our individual rooms. Her room was next to mine. As it was Saturday, I slept in the afternoon, and my mother had already left the house when I woke up. As soon as I opened the bedroom door, something on the floor caught my eye. There were 3 scratches on the floor, one coming out of my room, right in line with my doorframe, and another 2 going down the hall and heading towards my mother's room. They looked like scratches from shoes. I thought it was strange because looking on the scratch coming from my room, the door had to be open enough to pass the threshold, and that had to have happened while I was sleeping, which also made no sense. The order of the scratches didn't make sense either, because it looked like the person had left my mother's room, gone down the hall, and turned abruptly into my room, or the other way around. The scratches were long, the kind that sports shoes would make, and the chances my mother had shoes on indoors were 0. Shoes are banned indoors. When my mother arrived while I was having lunch, I asked what those scratches on the hallway floor were. She turned irritated and questioned, "What do you mean, what are they? You made it, didn't you?" The burger felt like sand in my mouth. I said no, that I thought it was her. We both got up at the same time and walked into the hallway and stared at the scratches. And then she said something that freaked me out. "By the way, I didn't clean it because I had already cleaned up the mud you brought into the house." I got irritated and thought I'd at least leave this here for you to clean up. I almost fell backwards. "Mud?" I asked. She gave me a nervous smile and said that there were small concentrations of mud in some places in the house, that she found them on the porch, in the living room, and in the hallway too. I hadn't even been on the porch that day. I sure went through my whole body because I knew someone had entered our house. And the worst thing was, they had opened my bedroom door and watched me sleep. With my class, I had swimming classes. We went with my teacher, who was in her early 60s if I remember correctly, and a teaching assistant. There was also always a lifeguard, sometimes even 2. My school rented the pool from the university next door, and my class consisted of just over 20 students. We all got changed, waited on benches inside the water. We had these heavy metal benches that were tall so we could stand on them and have our upper bodies above the water. There was no shallow end, just a regular deep expanse. I was a very agitated and fidgety child, so I bounced up and down, messing around. Unfortunately, my foot slipped off the edge and I fell. I realized immediately I was drowning. I could not swim very well. I jumped and pushed against the walls and pool floor, trying to get to the surface. My classmates were screaming, trying to pull me up, as it was obvious I needed help. I kept trying to get to the surface. My classmates' screams got louder, no sign of a lifeguard. I was still drowning, scared, getting tired. I forgot about the people around me. There was just me and the water. After what seemed like forever, I was hauled out by the lifeguard and yelled at thoroughly. I was so scared, I ran into the bathroom, refusing to swim anymore. My teachers called my mom, telling her I intentionally skipped class for no reason, failing to mention I almost drowned, even though I begged to talk to her. I was sad and angry that they did this. Also, how could they and the lifeguard have been so unresponsive to all the screaming and me drowning? When I got home, I was again scolded. Many years later, I told my mom what really happened, and she was shocked and angry at my teachers, confirming that they hadn't said a thing about it. This happened back in the 80s, so very much the pre-cell phone era. I was in high school at the time. One night after dinner, my mom suggested we take a walk around the block to walk off dinner. My brother and dad were watching TV and opted to stay home, so it was just us girls. We lived out in the fringes of the suburbs, in a subdivision that was semi-rural. By that I mean there were houses but no streetlights or sidewalks. Everyone had septic tanks as there was no sewer service, etc. The houses were all well back from the road and the lots were wooded. Anyway, we were walking around the block, which is about 1.5 miles total, and we're almost back home. It's pitch black that night, no moon, and we had a flashlight to use as needed. Without it you can see much past a foot or two around you. We mainly used it as a signal if car went by, but there wasn't really anyone around, so we had to switch it off and we were just walking and chatting. As we turned the corner onto our street, we suddenly heard footsteps behind us. This was a bit weird, as we had just come from that way and hadn't seen or heard anyone walking on that street or coming down the driveway as we passed. But we just figured it was some neighbor also out for a walk, and we hadn't noticed them in the dark. So I turned around to look and switched the flashlight on to see who it was. They immediately switched a flashlight on too, so I could only see their flashlight and not them. They said nothing. We kept walking, but the footsteps behind us sped up now, as they sounded heavy, so we thought it was a man. We sped up. He sped up. I turned the flashlight back and he turned his on again in silence. We were too scared to call out, and now we were approaching our driveway. As we got there, I pushed my mom in front and told her to get up the driveway, which was steep and long. Once she had a start, I sprinted up after her. As I did, the footsteps veered away to the other side of the road and kept going. Nothing was ever said by this person, and normally people here waved and spoke when out walking or even driving by. When we got up to the house, my dad said it was probably just a neighbor, so my brother and I got in my car and drove down the road to see who it was. No one was there. We went around all roads and no one was walking on them. There wasn't time for him to just leave the area. Either it was a nasty neighbor getting off on scaring us, then ducking into a house, or whoever it was came out of the woods behind us and then disappeared back into them. My grandparents live in a house located in a very secluded area surrounded by woods. The nearest neighbor is around half a mile from their house. Whenever my grandfather has work in town for a couple of days, he calls me home to take care of my grandmother, who suffers from arthritis. One night, it started raining heavily, and there was a power cut the entire night. It was really windy, and since the house is pretty old, you can hear a lot of creaking sounds. But at around 1 in the middle of the night, I woke up to a loud knocking sound at the front door. My grandmother was still sleeping, and I didn't want to wake her up. The noise had freaked me out because it was impossible for someone to be out at this time in the rain, outside our house. But I thought maybe it's my grandfather who probably had some emergency and had to come home at this time of the night. As I walked to the main door to see who it was, the knocking stopped. I saw our dog standing at the corner of the room, looking at the door with his tail between his legs. He looked super scared. I figured something wasn't right, and that if someone was outside my door, it obviously wasn't my grandfather. I went upstairs to see who it was through a window and saw a shadow. But I'm not sure if it was actually a person's shadow or just a hallucination of my sleepy mind. I did not open the door and went right back to bed. The creepiest part was, the next morning I saw muddy footprints on the porch and a broken door handle. And that's it for today's video. If you guys enjoyed it, please leave a like, comment down below which one was your favorite, and don't forget to check out the links down below in the description to see if you want to support the channel or find any other way to share stories of your own. But until next time, bye bye.